I stared at the clock on the wall, its ticking somehow louder than usual in the quiet house. Ellie should have been home an hour ago. She'd gone out to meet her doctor, again. At least, that's what she said. But this time, something felt different. The whole day, I had this knot in my stomach, like some warning bell going off in the back of my mind. It wasn't just the timing that was off. Ellie had been acting strange for weeks, more distant than ever. And even though she had her illness as an excuse, it didn't add up. She seemed healthier than she had in a long time. But she wasn't here. Where was she? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, scrolling through old text messages as if looking for some kind of clue I'd missed. They were all the same, small updates, nothing meaningful. A lot of them were just reminders for me to pick up prescriptions or bring her meals to bed. She had trained me well. I'd been doing it without question for months now, ever since she told me about her diagnosis. It was aggressive, she said, but she'd caught it in time. The treatments were grueling, but she was handling it, so I handled everything else. The front door creaked open, and I flinched, almost dropping my phone. She walked in, looking fresh-faced and more energetic than someone with her supposed condition should. Ellie smiled at me, faintly, as if we were strangers. "Hey, I'm back," she said, slipping off her coat. "Sorry I'm late. The doctor took longer than expected." I stood up, stuffing my hands into my pockets, trying to keep my voice calm. "The doctor again? Didn't you just go 2 days ago?" Her eyes darted to the side, just for a second. "Yeah, well, this was a follow-up." She turned away and headed toward the kitchen. "You know how it is with these things." I didn't say anything. I just followed her, watching as she poured herself a glass of water, her movements too fluid, too relaxed. She wasn't tired. She wasn't sick. My gut twisted tighter. "How are you feeling?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She didn't meet my gaze. "The same, I guess. It's day by day, day by day." That was the line she always used, the line that had kept me quiet for months. But now it felt like a lie, like everything she'd been saying was part of some script. I couldn't take it anymore. "You don't look like you're feeling the same." The words came out sharper than I intended. Ellie froze, the glass halfway to her lips. Slowly, she set it down on the counter and turned to face me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "I mean, you don't look sick, Ellie. You look fine. In fact, you've been looking fine for weeks now." Her face hardened. "Are you accusing me of something?" I stepped closer, my hands tightening into fists in my pockets. "I don't know, Ellie, am I?" For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. The silence between us felt thick, like it had weight. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "You think I'm faking this? You think I'm lying about my condition?" "I don't know what to think anymore," I said, my voice low. "But something's not right. You're not telling me everything." She crossed her arms, her jaw clenched. "What exactly are you accusing me of, Michael?" I hesitated. I hadn't planned this confrontation. I didn't have proof, just a feeling, an instinct that something was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. "Where were you tonight, really?" I asked, "because I don't believe you were with your doctor." Her eyes flashed with anger. "I was with my doctor, Michael. What is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shouted, the dam finally breaking. "What's wrong with you, Ellie? You've been lying to me for months. I can feel it. You've been distant, cold, acting like a stranger. You're not sick, are you?" She stared at me, her face pale, and for a second I thought I saw something like fear in her eyes. Then she quickly masked it with indignation. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. "You have no idea what I've been through." "Then tell me," I demanded. "Tell me the truth for once." Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head. "I don't owe you anything, Michael." My stomach dropped. There it was. The confirmation I hadn't wanted but had expected. She wasn't going to tell me. She was never going to tell me. She was going to keep lying until the end. "Ellie," I said, my voice softening, "please, just tell me what's going on. I deserve that much." She didn't say anything. Instead, she turned away and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there alone with the weight of her silence. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to chase after her, to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Whatever was going on, Ellie wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. But I wasn't going to let this go. I couldn't. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what it was, no matter what it took. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to Ellie's soft breathing beside me. She slept so soundly, so peacefully, while my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How deep did her lies go? And who was she seeing behind my back? The next day, I made a decision. I was going to follow her. I had to know the truth. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still racing with thoughts of the night before. Ellie was still asleep, her body curled up on the other side of the bed, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I couldn't stand being in the same room as her, not after what had happened. I got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and made my way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only happens early in the morning before the rest of the world wakes up. It gave me too much time to think. I stood by the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the coffee machine, wondering if I was making the right decision. But then I thought about the look on Ellie's face when I confronted her last night. The fear, the anger, the deflection. She was hiding something, and I had to know what it was. Today was the day I'd find out. I couldn't wait anymore. I wasn't going to be the blind, clueless husband any longer. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through Ellie's recent calls. Nothing stood out, just the same contacts I'd seen before. Doctor's office, pharmacy, the occasional call to a friend. But I wasn't stupid. I knew she wouldn't be that obvious. I needed more than just her phone records. I needed to see it for myself. That's when I decided to follow her. It wasn't hard to wait for the moment. She woke up a couple of hours later, her mood strangely neutral. She moved around the house quietly, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't almost torn each other apart last night. She didn't even bring it up, and that bothered me more than anything. How could she just pretend everything was fine? Maybe because it was easier for her to live with the lies than to face the truth. After breakfast, Ellie told me she was going out to meet with her doctor again. She said it casually, like it was just another appointment, but I didn't miss the tension in her voice, the way she avoided my eyes. I nodded, playing along, acting like I believed her, but inside, I was already planning my next move. She left the house around noon, and I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. I made sure to keep a safe distance, not wanting to be seen. She didn't drive far, just across town, and I kept thinking to myself, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she really is going to the doctor. But then, she didn't turn toward the medical clinic. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe. I parked a few cars away, watching her as she got out of the car. She walked into the cafe with purpose, like she'd been there before. And then I saw him, a tall man, dressed in a suit, sitting by the window. He looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom, not a casual coffee shop. Ellie walked right up to him, smiled, and sat down across from him. They didn't even order anything. They just started talking, leaning in close, their expressions serious. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was the proof I needed. She wasn't meeting her doctor. She was meeting him. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I walked in there now, I'd blow my cover, and I needed more than just a few minutes of conversation to confront her. I needed to know how long this had been going on, how deep her betrayal went. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching them. They talked, their expressions growing more animated as the minutes passed. At one point, the man reached across the table and took Ellie's hand, squeezing it gently. She didn't pull away. She smiled at him, the kind of smile I hadn't seen from her in months. It made me sick to my stomach. Finally, they stood up, Ellie grabbing her coat as they headed toward the door. I slouched in my seat, trying not to be seen as they walked past my car. The man had his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward a sleek black car parked at the far end of the lot. I watched as they got in and drove off together. I followed them, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me. They drove out of town, heading toward the outskirts, and my heart pounded in my chest. Where were they going? After about 20 minutes, they pulled into a gated community. The kind of place where houses cost more than I'd ever make in a lifetime. I stopped at the entrance, watching as the gate opened for them. They drove inside, disappearing from view. I couldn't follow them any further without raising suspicion, so I sat there for a while, trying to process what I'd just seen. Ellie wasn't just having an affair. She was living an entirely different life with this man, one that had nothing to do with me. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Did Ellie even care about me anymore, or had she just been using me this whole time? By the time I got home, I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't stay in that house, not while Ellie's lies were closing in around me. I grabbed my jacket and left again, not even sure where I was going. I just needed to get out to clear my head. I ended up driving to the park where Ellie and I used to go when we first started dating. It was a place full of good memories, but now it felt hollow, like those memories belonged to someone else. I sat on a bench, staring at the pond, watching the ducks glide across the water. I tried to think about what to do next, but my thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Why? Why would Ellie do this? Why would she fake her illness, keep me tied to her, when she clearly didn't want me anymore? And then, like a punch to the gut, I realized the answer. She hadn't just been lying about her affair. She'd been lying about everything. Her illness, the treatments, all of it. She'd been keeping me around because she needed me. I was the backup plan, the safety net, the one she could count on to take care of her while she lived her double life with someone else. I felt a surge of anger, hotter and more intense than anything I'd felt before. She'd played me for a fool, made me believe she needed me, that she was sick and fragile, when in reality, she was just using me. I stood up, pacing around the park, trying to calm myself down. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I couldn't just sit back and let her continue this charade. I had to confront her, make her tell me the truth. But how? How could I get her to admit everything without her twisting the story, making me out to be the bad guy? She was good at that, turning things around, making me doubt myself. As I drove back home, I started to form a plan. I couldn't just go in guns blazing, accusing her of everything. I had to be smarter than that. I had to gather more proof, more details, so when I finally confronted her, there would be no way for her to wriggle out of it. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, barely able to concentrate on anything. Ellie came home later that evening, acting like nothing had happened. She smiled at me, asked how my day was, and I played along, pretending I didn't know the truth. But inside, I was fuming. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, my mind racing with everything I'd seen and learned. Ellie slept beside me, her breathing soft and steady, as if she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew better now. I knew what she was hiding. I had to get more information. I had to find out who this man was, how long this had been going on, and why she had kept me in the dark for so long. But most of all, I needed to understand why she had faked her illness, why she had kept me tied to her when she clearly didn't want me anymore. The next morning, I woke up early again, my mind already racing with plans. I needed to find out more, and I had an idea of how to do it. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer plan in mind. I couldn't just confront Ellie again without solid proof. I'd seen her with the man, but I needed to know more. Who was he? How long had this been going on? What had she told him about me, if anything? I had a lot of questions, and I wasn't going to get the answers by playing dumb. I needed more information, and I needed to find a way to gather it without tipping her off. I decided to start by going through her things. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, snooping through my wife's personal stuff, but after what I'd seen yesterday, I couldn't afford to play nice anymore. I waited until Ellie left the house again, claiming she had another doctor's appointment, and as soon as she was gone, I got to work. I started with her laptop. She never let me use it, always saying it was for her work or her personal business. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I realized it was probably full of secrets. I tried her usual passwords, our anniversary, her birthday, but nothing worked. After a few more failed attempts, I gave up on the laptop and moved on to her phone. I knew she kept it locked too, but she wasn't as careful with her text messages. I found it sitting on the kitchen counter, right where she always left it when she went out. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, scrolling through her messages. Most of them were innocent enough. Texts to her friends, reminders from the pharmacy, the usual. But then I found a thread with someone named G. I felt my heart race as I clicked on it. The messages between Ellie and G were cryptic but damning. They talked about meeting up, about spending time together when I was busy. They didn't mention me directly, but it was clear they were talking about me. There were even a few messages where they joked about how clueless I was, how easy it was to keep me in the dark. My stomach churned. I couldn't believe how brazen they were, laughing at me behind my back like I was some kind of idiot. But I wasn't an idiot. Not anymore. I kept scrolling through the messages, trying to figure out who G was. There were no pictures, no identifying details, just vague plans to meet at various locations, restaurants, hotels, even his house, I assumed. But then I found something. A message from a week ago, talking about meeting at his place in the gated community, the same one I'd seen them drive into yesterday. My hands shook as I realized how deep this went. She hadn't just been cheating with some random guy. This was serious. She was spending her days in some fancy gated house while I was at home thinking she was fighting for her life. I knew I had to find out more. I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but something about that felt too removed. I needed to see this through myself. I needed to face this head on. The next day, I decided to follow her again. I needed to know where she went after she left the house. Sure enough, she drove right back to the same gated community. This time, I parked outside the entrance and waited. It was a long, frustrating wait, but I was determined to get answers. After an hour, I saw the gate open and Ellie's car drove out. But she wasn't alone. The man, G, was sitting next to her, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I clenched the steering wheel, watching as they drove past me, heading back toward town. I followed them, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice. They ended up at a hotel this time. Something about that made my blood boil even more. They weren't just meeting at his place anymore. They were booking hotel rooms, like they needed to hide even further. I watched them walk into the lobby together, Ellie's arm casually brushing against his as they laughed and talked. It was like she was living an entirely different life, one that had nothing to do with me. I stayed in my car for what felt like an eternity, trying to calm the anger boiling inside me. Part of me wanted to storm into that hotel and confront them both, but I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. I had to be smart about this. I had to play it cool until I had all the information I needed. Once they disappeared inside, I waited a while longer before heading back home. My mind was racing the entire drive. I needed to figure out who G was. If I could put a name to the face, maybe I could get a clearer picture of what was going on. When I got home, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started searching through Ellie's things again. This time, I focused on the paper trail. She wasn't careful with her mail, leaving it scattered around the house. I sifted through the pile of letters and bills on the kitchen table, hoping to find something that would give me a clue about this guy. And then I found it. A letter from a real estate company, addressed to Ellie, but with a different address than ours. The address matched the gated community. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. She wasn't just spending time at this guy's place. She had a second house. I stared at the letter, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Ellie had an entire life I knew nothing about, a life that didn't include me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence was right in front of me. My wife, the woman I'd devoted my life to, had been living a double life for who knows how long, and I'd been too blind to see it. I knew I had to confront her, but I needed to do it right. I needed to gather everything, every lie, every secret, so that when the time came, she couldn't deny any of it. I wasn't going to let her twist the truth or turn this around on me. Not this time. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Ellie's steady breathing beside me. She had no idea what I knew, no idea that her entire web of lies was about to come crashing down. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I decided to take a day off work, telling Ellie I needed some time to clear my head. She barely responded, too absorbed in her phone to care. I knew she was probably texting G, planning their next meeting. I waited for her to leave the house again, then I grabbed the letter I'd found and drove straight to the gated community. This time, I wasn't going to sit outside and wait. I was going to see what was really going on behind those gates. I pulled up to the entrance and told the guard I was there to see Ellie. To my surprise, he didn't even question it. He just waved me through as if I belonged there, as if I were part of this other life Ellie had built. I drove through the winding streets, passing rows of expensive houses until I found the address from the letter. It was a large, modern house, the kind of place I could never have afforded on my own. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked outside. This was it. This was where she'd been spending her time. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Was I going to knock? Was I going to barge in and demand answers? But before I could decide, the door opened, and standing there, in the doorway, was Ellie. She looked as surprised to see me as I was to see her. "Michael?" she said, her voice full of confusion. "What are you doing here?" I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I could ask you the same thing. What the hell is going on, Ellie?" She blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to come up with an explanation. But there was no explaining this. Not anymore. I stepped past her, into the house, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of the life she'd been living behind my back. And that's when I saw it. A framed photo on the mantelpiece. Ellie and G, standing in front of this very house, smiling like a happy couple, like a couple that had nothing to hide. My stomach churned as I realized how deep this betrayal went. I stood there, staring at the photo on the mantel, unable to move. Ellie and G were smiling, their arms wrapped around each other, looking as if they didn't have a care in the world. They looked like a real couple, like they belonged together. The kind of happiness that was supposed to be mine. The room seemed to spin, the reality of it all hitting me like a freight train. This wasn't just some affair. This wasn't just a fling. This was a whole other life, and I had no part in it. Ellie stood frozen behind me, the door still half open, her mouth agape like she was struggling to find the right words. But what words could she possibly use to explain this? There was no explanation that would make any of this okay. "Michael, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her, my voice shaking with anger. "How long has this been going on, Ellie?" Her eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape, but there was nowhere for her to go. Not this time. "Answer me," I demanded, taking a step closer to her. "How long?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she closed the door behind her. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what I think. I'm standing in your other house, Ellie. I'm looking at pictures of you and him. So tell me, what exactly am I missing here?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. Done with the lies, the manipulation, the guilt she'd made me carry for months. She had been using me, playing me, and now I was finally seeing the full extent of her deceit. "It's complicated," she whispered. "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been living a double life, Ellie. How is that complicated? You've been lying to me for God knows how long, pretending to be sick, making me take care of you while you ran off with him." I gestured wildly toward the photo, my chest heaving with every breath. Ellie flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You didn't mean for it to go this far." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What the hell does that even mean? How long, Ellie? How long have you been lying to me? She wiped at her eyes, her breath hitching. "A year, maybe a little more. A year. A year of my life wasted on a woman who was living a lie. A year of me putting my dreams on hold, taking care of her, believing she needed me. All while she was sneaking off to this house, to this man." I shook my head, feeling like I might be sick. "Why? Why did you do this?" She looked down at the floor, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know how to get out." "Get out of what?" I shouted. "Our marriage?" She nodded, her tears falling faster now. "I felt trapped, Michael. I didn't know how to leave without hurting you, and then I met him, and it just happened." "It just happened?" I echoed, disbelief washing over me. "You don't accidentally start an affair and buy a house together, Ellie. This wasn't some mistake." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know it's not. I didn't know how to stop." I stared at her, my hands shaking with fury. "You didn't know how to stop? You could have told me the truth, Ellie. You could have come clean at any point, but instead, you faked being sick. You let me believe you were dying, for God's sake. Do you have any idea what that did to me? She nodded, her sobs racking her body. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry. Sorry? I felt the words like a punch to the gut. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Ellie. You've been lying to me every single day for a year. And for what? So you could play house with him. Her face crumpled, and she sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I wanted to feel something for her, some shred of the love I used to have, but all I felt was anger and betrayal. I turned away from her, pacing the room, my thoughts racing. This couldn't be real. How had I been so blind? How had I missed all the signs? But as I looked around the room, at the photos, the furniture, the small touches that screamed Ellie, I realized this had been going on right in front of me. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I had trusted her. I had believed she needed me. And she had used that against me. You were never sick, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer, but I could hear her sobbing quietly on the couch, her guilt finally catching up to her. I turned back to her, my voice cold and flat. You lied about everything, about being sick, about needing me. You let me think you were dying so I wouldn't question anything. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't want to lose you. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't want to lose me? Ellie, you lost me the second you decided to lie. You didn't care about me. You cared about not getting caught. She shook her head, her voice desperate. That's not true. I care about you, Michael. I do. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you just end it? Why did you keep stringing me along, making me believe you were dying? She didn't answer right away, her eyes filled with guilt and shame. I didn't know how to leave. You've always been so good to me, and I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I felt a surge of anger rising inside me. You didn't want to hurt me, but you were okay with lying to me every day? You were okay with me giving up everything to take care of you while you ran off to him? Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands again. I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I stared at her, my mind spinning. This woman, my wife, had been lying to me for a year. She had faked an illness, made me believe she was dying, all so she could carry on an affair behind my back. I didn't even know who she was anymore. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I had spent the past year living in a nightmare, and now I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. Everything I thought I knew about Ellie, about our marriage, had been a lie. I couldn't stay in this house any longer. I couldn't be near her, not right now. I turned and headed for the door, my mind racing. Michael, wait, she called after me, her voice thick with tears. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. What? I said, my voice cold. Please don't leave like this, she whispered. We can fix this. I can explain everything. I shook my head, feeling the anger boiling inside me. There's nothing to explain, Ellie. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now I don't even know who you are. With that, I walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I drove around for what felt like hours, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't believe this was happening. My marriage was over. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. As I drove, my thoughts drifted to something strange. Over the past few weeks, I had been having these odd dreams. Dreams about someone else. A woman from my past, someone I hadn't thought about in years. The dreams had been so vivid, so real, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than just dreams. As I drove, the city streets blurred into a hazy backdrop, the usual landmarks of my life now unfamiliar in the wake of everything that had happened. Ellie's betrayal sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But what haunted me even more than her lies was the memory of those dreams. They had started about a month ago, slowly at first, just flashes of a woman, a face I couldn't fully make out. But lately, they'd become more frequent, more detailed, like pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. I pulled over at a small park, the same park where Ellie and I used to walk when we were still happy before all the lies. I sat in the car, staring blankly at the people passing by. Families, couples, kids, everything seemed so normal for them. For me, my whole world had shifted. Closing my eyes, I tried to remember the dreams. Each one had been so vivid, like I was reliving a memory instead of simply imagining something. The woman in the dreams had long, dark hair, and her laugh echoed in my mind, soft and familiar. It felt like I knew her, but I couldn't place where or when. Was she someone from my past? A woman I had met once, forgotten about, and now my mind was dredging up old memories for reasons I couldn't understand? But as I sat there, replaying those dreams, something clicked. It wasn't just the feeling of familiarity, it was the way she made me feel in the dreams. Safe, happy, loved. It was the opposite of everything I felt now. And then it hit me. Had I ever truly felt that way with Ellie, even before the lies? My chest tightened at the thought. Maybe Ellie's betrayal wasn't the only thing I had been blind to. Maybe I had been lying to myself too, pretending that our marriage had been perfect when, in reality, it had been falling apart long before the affair. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Now wasn't the time to start questioning everything. I needed answers, not more confusion. I needed to understand why these dreams were happening now, of all times. Why was I remembering this woman? Who was she? I decided to drive to the one place where I thought I might find answers. My old neighborhood. It had been years since I had last visited, and I hadn't thought about it in ages. But something about the dreams was pulling me back there, as if the answers I was looking for were hidden in that part of my life. The drive was long, but as I got closer, the memories started to flood back. The streets looked the same, the houses a little older but still familiar. I pulled up to my childhood home, the place where I had spent most of my early years. It was strange being back, like stepping into a time capsule. I parked the car and got out, walking slowly up the sidewalk. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and the sound of children playing in the distance brought back a rush of memories. But as I stood there, looking at the house, a different memory surfaced. One that didn't belong to my childhood, but to the woman in my dreams. I saw us, her and me, standing on that same sidewalk, talking, laughing. I could almost hear her voice, clear and familiar. The memory was so strong it made me dizzy. I leaned against the car, trying to catch my breath. How could I remember something like this? Had it really happened, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I shook my head, trying to push the memory aside. I needed to focus. If this woman was real, if she had been part of my life, then there had to be some trace of her. Maybe my parents would know. They had always kept track of my old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I got back in the car and drove the few blocks to their house. My parents still lived in the same place they had moved to when I was a teenager, a modest home with a large front porch. As I pulled into the driveway, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I hadn't visited them in a while, not since Ellie's supposed illness had taken over my life. But now, I needed their help. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, my mom opened it, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Michael, what a surprise," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to smile. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I just needed to talk." She pulled back, her eyes searching mine, clearly noticing something was off. "Of course, it's okay. Come in. Your dad's in the backyard." I followed her inside, the familiar smell of home cooking filling the air. It felt comforting, like a brief moment of normalcy in the chaos that had become my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something bigger, something I needed to understand. We sat down in the living room, and after a few minutes of catching up, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me. "Mom, do you remember anyone I might have known a long time ago? A woman, maybe someone from the neighborhood?" She looked at me, puzzled. "A woman? Well, you had a lot of friends growing up, Michael. Are you talking about someone specific?" "I'm not sure," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "I've been having these dreams about a woman I used to know. At least I think I knew her. She feels so familiar, like she was important to me, but I can't place her." My mom furrowed her brow, thinking, "Dreams, huh? Well, let's see. There was that girl, Jennifer, who lived down the street. You two were inseparable when you were younger, always playing together. But that was years ago. Could it be her?" I shook my head. "No, it's not Jennifer. This woman, it feels different, like there was something more between us." My mom's eyes softened, and she reached over, patting my hand. "I don't know, Michael. Maybe it's just your mind trying to work through everything you're going through with Ellie." I tensed at the mention of Ellie. My parents knew about her illness, or at least the illness she had faked. They had been supportive, offering to help in any way they could, but I hadn't told them about the affair. Not yet. I didn't have the energy to explain it all, not when I was still trying to figure it out myself. Maybe, I muttered, but I wasn't convinced. There was something more to these dreams. They felt too real, too vivid to be just a product of my imagination. I spent the rest of the afternoon with my parents, talking about old memories, hoping something would jog my mind. But nothing did. As I drove back home, I felt more lost than ever. The dreams were still there, hovering just out of reach, taunting me with fragments of a past I couldn't fully remember. When I got back to the house, Ellie was waiting for me. She looked anxious, like she had been expecting a fight. But I wasn't in the mood for another argument. I was too exhausted, too drained from everything. "Michael, can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. I nodded, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't, not yet. She sat down on the couch, wringing her hands nervously. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I don't want to lose you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I still love you. I want to fix this." I stared at the floor, her words washing over me, but they didn't reach my heart. I didn't know if I could believe her anymore. After everything she had done, everything she had lied about, how could I ever trust her again? "I don't know if that's possible, Ellie," I said quietly, my voice flat. She started to cry, but this time, her tears didn't move me. I was too numb, too disconnected from the woman sitting in front of me, the woman I thought I had loved. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But the words felt hollow, like an echo of something that had once meant something, but no longer did. I stood up, unable to stay in the same room with her. "I need some space, Ellie. I need to figure out what I want, and right now I can't do that with you here." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Michael, please." But I didn't let her finish. I walked out of the room, heading upstairs to the bedroom, where I could finally be alone with my thoughts. As I lay in bed that night, the dreams came again. This time, they were even clearer. The woman with the dark hair was laughing, her voice soft and warm. I could see her face now, full of life and light. She reached out for me, and for the first time, I reached back. And that's when I remembered her name. Her name was Emily. The moment the name surfaced in my mind, it was like a dam breaking. Memories I didn't even know I had came flooding back, fragments of a time I had long since buried. Emily. How could I have forgotten her? How could I have forgotten us? I sat up in bed, my heart racing, the room spinning as I tried to make sense of it all. Emily had been my first love. We had met in college. She was in the art department, always covered in paint and full of energy, and I was the quiet guy who spent most of his time in the library. We were an odd match, but it worked. She had pulled me out of my shell, made me laugh, made me feel things I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. But then, things had changed. I had gotten a job offer across the country after graduation, and she had wanted to stay behind to pursue her art. We had tried to make it work long distance, but eventually, the calls became less frequent, the texts fewer and farther between. Life had gotten in the way, and we had drifted apart. By the time I moved back to our hometown years later, we had lost touch completely. I hadn't thought about her in so long. And now, here she was, back in my dreams, in my mind, as if she had never left. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this, something I needed to understand. Why was I remembering her now, after all these years? Why had she resurfaced in my dreams, just as my life with Ellie was falling apart? Was my mind trying to tell me something? I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, the memories of Emily swirling in my head. I remembered the way she had made me feel, alive, free, happy. She had been everything Ellie wasn't, and now, in the wake of Ellie's betrayal, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake, if I had let the wrong person go. The next few days passed in a blur. Ellie tried to talk to me, tried to make amends, but I couldn't bring myself to engage with her. I spent most of my time avoiding her, going for long drives or locking myself in the spare bedroom. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily. Every dream was clearer than the last, and with each one, I remembered more about our time together. It was as if my mind was piecing together a puzzle, showing me something I had forgotten or ignored. One night, after another restless sleep filled with images of Emily, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find her. I had to know if these memories, these dreams, meant something. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe she had moved on, started a family, forgotten about me completely. But I needed closure, one way or another. I spent the next day searching online, trying to track her down. It wasn't easy. She had never been the type to leave a big digital footprint. But after hours of digging, I found her. She was living in the same town we had gone to college in, working as an artist, just like she had always dreamed. I stared at her website for a long time, my heart pounding as I looked at the pictures of her artwork. It was beautiful, just like I remembered, full of color and life. And there she was, in one of the photos, standing in front of a mural she had painted. She hadn't changed much, still the same bright smile, the same spark in her eyes. Seeing her like that brought a rush of emotions I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to send her a message and explain everything. But another part of me was terrified. What if she didn't remember me? What if she had moved on, happy in a new life, and I was just dredging up the past for no reason? I paced around the house for hours, trying to figure out my next move. Ellie was out for the evening, probably with him, and the house felt emptier than ever. The silence was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't just sit there anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to say or do, but I knew I had to see her. I had to know if the memories, the dreams, meant something. If there was still something between us after all these years. The drive to Emily's town was long, and with every mile my anxiety grew. What if this was a mistake? What if I was chasing something that didn't exist anymore? But something deep inside me pushed me forward, like a force I couldn't control. When I finally pulled up outside her small art studio, my hands were shaking. The lights were on inside, and I could see her through the window, painting, completely absorbed in her work. For a moment, I just sat there, watching her, my heart pounding in my chest. She looked so at peace, so alive, and I realized with startling clarity that I hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. Not with Ellie. Not with anyone. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead as I walked up to the door. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door handle. What if this changed everything? What if seeing her again unraveled everything I thought I knew about my life? But I couldn't stop now. I opened the door, the small bell above it chiming as I stepped inside. The smell of paint and turpentine filled the air, and Emily looked up from her canvas, startled. For a second, she didn't recognize me. But then her eyes widened, and her brush fell from her hand. "Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood there frozen, my heart racing. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the years that had passed between us hanging heavy in the air. I could see the shock on her face, the surprise, but there was something else, too. Something that looked a lot like recognition. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I've been thinking about you. A lot." She blinked, her brow furrowing. "Thinking about me?" I nodded, taking a step closer. "I've been having these dreams, Emily. Dreams about you, about us. And I don't know why, but I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop remembering." Her expression softened, and she took a step back, leaning against her work table. "Dreams? About us?" "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what it means, but I had to see you. I had to know if there's still something here, something I've been missing all these years." She looked away, her face tense with emotion. "Michael, it's been so long. We haven't spoken in years. Why now?" I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "I don't know, but I'm not happy, Emily. My life, it's falling apart, and these dreams, these memories of you, they're the only thing that's made sense to me in a long time." She let out a soft sigh, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know what to say, Michael. A lot has changed since we were together. I've changed." "I know," I said, stepping closer. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can figure it out together." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "And what about Ellie?" The mention of Ellie's name hit me like a punch to the gut, but I knew I couldn't avoid it. "Ellie and it's over, Emily. She lied to me. She betrayed me, and I don't think we can ever come back from that." Emily was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching mine. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and tentative. I never stopped thinking about you, Michael. Even after all these years. My breath caught in my throat. You didn't? She shook her head, a small sad smile tugging at her lips. No, I didn't. I took another step closer, until we were standing just a few feet apart. Maybe this is our second chance, Emily. Maybe we're supposed to find each other again. She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know. I'm scared, Michael. So much time has passed. I'm scared too, I admitted, but I can't shake the feeling that this means something, that we're meant to be here, right now, together. For a long time, she didn't say anything. But then, slowly, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Maybe, she whispered, maybe you're right. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I had found the truth I had been searching for. The truth about Emily, the truth about myself. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it.